Now let's talk about organic molecules. Let's look at the details. We talked about them in general. We said glucose is C6H12O6. Actually, I think what we said is that sugars are 1 to 2 to 1. We talked about the ratios of the elements. Said that's going to be your next quiz. By the way, your next quiz is going to be Wednesday of next week. Wednesday of next week.
Oh my God.
You know I'm recording this, right? You got almost a week to study for a quiz that you can use your notes on, and you're all freaking out. There's something wrong. Come on.
Yes.
What?
3?
Yes. As long as they're in oh my God. All right, moving on. Recording. Now that you're done complaining. All right, portraying biological molecules. How do we show what biomolecules are? We've talked about this to some extent. We've talked about the idea that these lines represent bonds, showing electrons. So if we have glucose and it's C6H12O6, that is glucose. You'll notice the ratio is 1 to 2 to 1. Do you notice that? For every 1 carbon, there's 1 oxygen. That's 6 to 6, right? That's a ratio of 1. Do you agree? And there's double the number of hydrogens. There's 12. So it's 1 to 2 to 1. In other words, reduce 6, 12, 6. It gets reduced, divide each of these by 6. What do you get? 1, 2, 1.
1 to 1, yeah.
So if you count them, there's 6 carbons, there's 6 oxygens, but there's 12 hydrogens. Now, this is called the structural formula. They just look at what structural formulas just at what's connected to what. This is also a structural formula, but that's because glucose, what it does is it can form a ring. And notice it's a hexagon. You will often see glucose depicted as just a hexagon. So if you see a hexagon, you can think of it as glucose. The ball and stick model, which we have I showed you guys while we were here when we were unpacking. We'll be using it in a small unit, small group capacity next week. You will create a ball and stick model of glucose, which is just each stick represents what? A bond, a chemical pair of electrons being shared. The space filling model just shows you, remember that the bonds are not really sticks, they're electrons being shared, and there are spaces, so this is actually more like what it looks like in the real world. So space filling gives you a little bit better idea of the geometry of the molecule. Remember, I try to tell you, and I will continue to tell you, that every molecule has its own shape. And that shape is very important to how things function. So let's take there are different groups, and I mentioned this as well. But you don't need to know these, memorize them, but know that there are different functional groups. It used to be that we had kids memorize these, but they're not, that what we find is that kids get overwhelmed by this. So let's not get overwhelmed. Just know that each functional group gives a molecule a different property. So it turns out if you have one functional group, the molecule is very polar. You have another group of functional groups, that molecule is very nonpolar. You have a combination of these things, they could be a little polar, a little nonpolar. So it's very interesting. For instance, if you have a phosphate, which is a group at the end of a molecule, that phosphate makes that molecule polar. But then you could have a long chain of carbons that would give you a nonpolar region of the molecule. So let's go through and answer these questions. Unless you just want to continue to have a conversation, maybe that's better for you. Which 3 elements make up the structure of organic molecules? What is organic? Carbon is right. What else? Hydrogen and oxygen. The 3 main things for organic molecules. Now we know there are more. What are the others?
Sulfur and nitrogen.
That's right. We have Schnapps. You better know schnapps. You better know schnapps. And don't forget, we have some other things like calcium and potassium are going to be important too. What? Phosphorus. The element phosphorus. Is that lightning? Is that thunder? Is that? Huh. Name two other elements that are also frequently part of organic molecules. Well, we already mentioned them. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, the three, really. How many covalent bonds of a carbon atom can form with neighboring atoms? By the way, phosphorus, remember we get phosphorus from what? Especially phosphate. They come from rocks. They're minerals. So phosphorus originates in rocks. Plants pick them up in solution and use them to make DNA and RNA, and then animals eat that. So phosphate comes from rocks. Your DNA's its backbone is made of rock, minerals. All right, have a good one. I was trying to give you the answers. You can figure this. I guess we could. I'll finish recording this to the other classes, and I'll post it. So. We can exemplify, we can draw, we can represent molecules in different forms, in different ways, depending on what we're trying to communicate. And one of the things that you really don't need to memorize, but you do have to have a sense about, is this idea of these functional groups. Functional groups are parts of molecules that give molecules specific properties. Some give those molecules, make them polar, some make them ionic, some make them acids, some make them bases. So what a molecule is determined in part by what functional group is around it, is in it. So you'll notice here, this functional group here makes this a carboxylic acid, or can make it a carboxylic acid depending on the group. And this is called a carboxyl group. Now, do you need to know it's a carboxyl group? No. But you do need to understand that biomolecules are just a bunch of atoms put together, and we have identified different groups that give these molecules special properties. Chemical properties. They can make them acidic, they can make them basic, they can make them act a certain way. As we've discussed with water, right? The fact that water has hydrogen bonding going on, there's a lot of properties, and you're going to be quizzed on it tomorrow, right? The properties of water, a big one, hydrogen bonding, a big one. Right? You're going to see that just the fact that water has one oxygen, two hydrogens, means that water has a high specific heat. Means that it hydrogen bonds, therefore has high specific heat. It allows it to have high surface tension. Allows it to freeze at a lower temperature than normally expected, to boil at a higher temperature than normally expected, be liquid at room temperature, float, be less dense in a solid form than its liquid form. All those properties come from how water is put together. Its shape, its chemical properties. All right. So now we take a look at name two other elements that are also frequently used in organic molecules. We said CHO are the three big ones, but then we got N, P, and S, right? So schnapps is the one you have to know. Calcium and potassium are two big ones as well. They're ions, but there you have it. State how many covalent bonds carbon can form. You should know that. How many is it? We've gone over it. How many? Look at your periodic table. How many? 4. Carbon can make up to 4. We looked at it when we looked at carbon dioxide. Distinguish between molecular and structural formulas of a given molecule. Take a look at a structure, and there you just have to look. There you're expected to look. Here's a structural formula, here's a molecular formula. What's the difference? That's right. Look at it. Look at it. You see the structure. You see what's connected to what. In the other one, the one next to it, you just have how many atoms of each you have. You don't even know really where they're all connected, do you? All you know is that there's 6 oxygens, 6 carbons, and 12 hydrogens. You don't know how they're all connected. This one shows you how they're all connected. Do you agree? Okay. I don't need to write that down. You heard it. I'm going to post it so you can write it down if you'd like later. What is a functional group? A functional group is just a group of atoms that give a specific function to the molecule. Some property to the molecule that it wouldn't have if it didn't have that functional group. Classify methanol according to the position of the C double bond O group. Do you see that? C double bond O. There's methanol. What kind of group is it? What kind of group does methanol have? Is it an aldehyde, a ketone, or a carboxyl? A carboxyl would have a double bond O, right? And an OH. Does this have an OH? No, it just has a double bond O with 2 H's. An aldehyde would have a double bond O with an H, and a ketone would have a double bond O with 2 C's. What is this? It's an aldehyde, is correct. The empty means it could be connected to anything, usually another carbon. Does that make sense? So this one, by the way, this one here is an aldehyde. Methanol is an aldehyde. All right. That was just practice. I do not expect you to memorize these. Bless you. I do not want you to go home and try and spend time trying to memorize these functional groups. Is that clear? In AP biology, in college biology, in medical school, for sure, you will know these. If you're going to be a pharmacist, you will need to know these. If you're going to be a chemist, you're going to do anything in the sciences that have to deal with biology or chemistry, you will know these. So could you, if you have extra time, you want to get your nerd on, go ahead and memorize it. I did when I was your age. All right. Classify or identify a functional group always present in amino acids. Well, you would know that because they don't really discuss it here. But this is the functional group that's always in amino acids. Are you ready? Guess what we call that? The functional group that's always in amino acids. It's really hard.
I had a feeling.
Science is so hard. It's just so hard.
I swear it is.
It's actually, and it's amine. I shouldn't have said amino. Sorry. Say that again?
I said, may I go to the bathroom?
Yes, yes. And we'll look at amino acids in just a minute. Identify the significance of cysteine in its formation of a disulfide bond. Disulfide bond. Why is cysteine important in disulfide bonds? What is a disulfide bond? It turns out that hydrogen bonding, that intermolecular force that we talked about between two molecules, can form between two sulfurs in a bond as well. We call that disulfide bonding. Cysteine is important because what does cysteine have? It's a disulfide bond. And cysteine has what? It has sulfur. Why is cysteine important in forming disulfide bonds? Because cysteine has sulfur in it. Are we good with all this? All right, so let's move on. You'll understand some of this a little. What is a functional group?